Chapter 12 of Alexander Crummell. This is the story of a human heart, the tale of a black boy who many long years ago began to struggle with life that he might know the world and know himself. 3 temptations he met on those dark dunes that lay gray and dismal before the wonder eyes of the child: the temptation of hate that stood out against the red dawn, the temptation of despair that darkened noonday, and the temptation of doubt that ever steals along with twilight. Above all, you must hear of the valleys he crossed, the valley of humiliation and the valley of the shadow of death. I saw Alexander Crummell first at a Wilberforce commencement season, amid its bustle and crush. Tall, frail, and black he stood, with simple dignity and an unmistakable air of good breeding. I talked with him apart, where the storming of the lusty young orators could not harm us. I spoke to him politely, then curiously, then eagerly, as I began to feel the fineness of his character, his calm courtesy, the sweetness of his strength, and his fair blending of the hope and truth of life. Instinctively I bowed before this man, as one bows before the prophets of the world. Some seer he seemed, that came not from the crimson past or the gray to come, but from the pulsing now, that mocking world which seemed to me at once so light and dark, so splendid and sordid. 80 years had he wandered in this same world of mine, within the veil. He was born with the Missouri Compromise and lay a-dying amid the echoes of Manila and El Caney, stirring times for living, times dark to look back upon, darker to look forward to. The black-faced lad that paused over his mud and marbles 70 years ago saw puzzling vistas as he looked down the world. The slave ship still groaned across the Atlantic, faint cries burdened the southern breeze, and the great black father whispered mad tales of cruelty into those young ears. From the low doorway the mother silently watched her boy at play, and at nightfall sought him eagerly lest the shadows bear him away to the land of slaves. So his young mind worked and winced and shaped curiously a vision of life, and in the midst of that vision ever stood one dark figure alone, ever with the hard, thick countenance of that bitter father, and a form that fell in vast and shapeless folds. Thus the temptation of hate grew and shadowed the growing child, gliding stealthily into his laughter, fading into his play, and seizing his dreams by day and night with rough, rude turbulence. So the black boy asked of sky and sun and flower that never answered why, and loved, as he grew, neither the world nor the world's rough ways. Strange temptation for a child, you may think, and yet in this wide land today 1,000 dark children brood before the same temptation, and feel its cold and shuddering arms. For them, perhaps, someone will someday lift the veil, will come tenderly and cheerily into those sad little lives and brush the brooding hate away, just as Beriah Green strode in upon the life of Alexander Crummell. And before the bluff, kind-hearted men the shadow seemed less dark. Beriah Green had a school in Oneida County, New York, with a score of mischievous boys. "I'm going to bring a black boy here to educate," said Beriah Green, as only a crank and an abolitionist would have dared to say. "Oh ho," laughed the boys. "Yes," said his wife, and Alexander came. Once before, the black boy had sought a school, had traveled, cold and hungry, 400 miles up into free New Hampshire, to Canaan. But the godly farmers hitched 90 yoke of oxen to the abolition schoolhouse and dragged it into the middle of the swamp. The black boy trudged away. The 19th was the first century of human sympathy, the age when half-wonderingly we began to descry in others that transfigured spark of divinity which we call myself, when clodhoppers and peasants, and tramps and thieves, and millionaires, and, sometimes, Negroes, became throbbing souls whose warm pulsing life touched us so nearly that we half-gasped with surprise, crying, "Thou too! Hast thou seen sorrow and the dull waters of hopelessness? Hast thou known life?" And then all helplessly we peered into those other worlds, and wailed, "O world of worlds, how shall man make you one?" So in that little Oneida school there came to those schoolboys a revelation of thought and longing beneath one black skin, of which they had not dreamed before. And to the lonely boy came a new dawn of sympathy and inspiration. The shadowy, formless thing, the temptation of hate, that hovered between him and the world, grew fainter and less sinister. It did not wholly fade away, but diffused itself and lingered thick at the edges. Through it the child now first saw the blue and gold of life, the sun-swept road that ran twixt heaven and earth until in one far-off wan wavering line they met and kissed. A vision of life came to the growing boy, mystic, wonderful. He raised his head, stretched himself, breathed deep of the fresh new air. Yonder, behind the forests, he heard strange sounds, then glinting through the trees he saw, far, far away, the bronzed hosts of a nation calling, calling faintly, calling loudly. He heard the hateful clank of their chains, he felt them cringe and grovel, and there rose within him a protest and a prophecy. And he girded himself to walk down the world. A voice in vision called him to be a priest, a seer to lead the uncalled out of the house of bondage. He saw the headless host turn toward him like the whirling of mad waters. He stretched forth his hands eagerly, and then, even as he stretched them, suddenly there swept across the vision the temptation of despair. They were not wicked men. The problem of life is not the problem of the wicked. They were calm, good men, bishops of the Apostolic Church of God, and strove toward righteousness. They said slowly, "It is all very natural, it is even commendable, but the General Theological Seminary of the Episcopal Church cannot admit a Negro." And when that thin, half-grotesque figure still haunted their doors, they put their hands kindly, half-sorrowfully, on his shoulders, and said, "Now, of course, we know how you feel about it, but you see it is impossible, that is, well, it is premature. Sometime, we trust, sincerely trust, all such distinctions will fade away, but now the world is as it is." This was the temptation of despair, and the young man fought it doggedly. Like some grave shadow he flitted by those halls, pleading, arguing, half angrily demanding admittance, until there came the final no, until men hustled the disturber away, marked him as foolish, unreasonable, and injudicious, a vain rebel against God's law. And then from that vision splendid all the glory faded slowly away, and left an earth gray and stern rolling on beneath a dark despair. Even the kind hands that stretched themselves toward him from out the depths of that dull morning seemed but parts of the purple shadows. He saw them coldly, and asked, "Why should I strive by special grace when the way of the world is closed to me?" All gently yet, the hands urged him on, the hands of young John Jay, that daring father's daring son, the hands of the good folk of Boston, that free city. And yet, with a way to the priesthood of the church open at last before him, the cloud lingered there, and even when in old St. Paul's the venerable bishop raised his white arms above the Negro deacon, even then the burden had not lifted from that heart, for there had passed a glory from the earth, and yet the fire through which Alexander Crummell went did not burn in vain. Slowly and more soberly he took up again his plan of life. More critically he studied the situation. Deep down below the slavery and servitude of the Negro people he saw their fatal weaknesses, which long years of mistreatment had emphasized. The dearth of strong moral character, of unbending righteousness, he felt, was their great shortcoming, and here he would begin. He would gather the best of his people into some little Episcopal chapel and there lead, teach, and inspire them, till the leaven spread, till the children grew, till the world hearkened, till, and then across his dream gleamed some faint afterglow of that first fair vision of youth, only an afterglow, for there had passed a glory from the earth. One day, it was in 1842, and the springtide was struggling merrily with the May winds of New England, he stood at last in his own chapel in Providence, a priest of the church. The days sped by, and the dark young clergyman labored. He wrote his sermons carefully, he intoned his prayers with a soft, earnest voice, he haunted the streets and accosted the wayfarers, he visited the sick, and knelt beside the dying. He worked and toiled, week by week, day by day, month by month. And yet month by month the congregation dwindled, week by week the hollow walls echoed more sharply, day by day the calls came fewer and fewer. And day by day the third temptation sat clearer and still more clearly within the veil, a temptation, as it were, bland and smiling, with just a shade of mockery in its smooth tones. First it came casually, in the cadence of a voice, "Oh, colored folks?" "Yes." Or perhaps more definitely, "What do you expect?" In voice and gesture lay the doubt, the temptation of doubt. How he hated it, and stormed at it furiously. "Of course they are capable," he cried, "of course they can learn and strive and achieve, and of course," added the temptation softly, "they do nothing of the sort." Of all the three temptations, this one struck the deepest. Hate? He had outgrown so childish a thing. Despair? He had steeled his right arm against it, and fought it with the vigor of determination. But to doubt the worth of his life work, to doubt the destiny and capability of the race his soul loved because it was his, to find listless squalor instead of eager endeavor, to hear his own lips whispering, "They do not care, they cannot know, they are dumb-driven cattle, why cast your pearls before swine?" This seemed more than man could bear, and he closed the door, and sank upon the steps of the chancel, and cast his robe upon the floor, and writhed.